48 years ago, on this day, in this holy land of Sri Vrindavan Dham, His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada performed his concluding pastimes on the physical plane in this world. Srila Prabhupada had departed from Vrindavan just 12 years before, and now in 1977, he had temples all over the world, thousands upon thousands of devotees, millions of books, and on this day, his bed at the Krishna Balaram temple was surrounded by loving disciples who had given their hearts and their lives to serving him, chanting the holy names. For weeks and weeks prior to this, Srila Prabhupada's physical health had deteriorated to such a degree he could not stand, he could not sit, he practically could not eat. He laid in his bed. Sometimes devotees would beg him to eat something, and just to satisfy, he would take 1 teaspoon. But still, he had his loving associates reading from the Srimad Bhagavatam Sanskrit, putting a dictaphone right up against his mouth, and although he could practically not speak, he whispered into that dictaphone the translations and purports of Srimad Bhagavatam. He gave his every drop of life energy to giving the world Krishna consciousness up until the last breath. I believe that every single disciple of Srila Prabhupada, they remember more than any other time in their life, the time, the place, the emotions of that moment when we heard that Srila Prabhupada had left us. Srila Prabhupada had entrusted all of his devotees with his mission to serve his Guru Maharaj, to push on the Krishna consciousness movement. But how? The senior-most devotees at the time were just initiated 8 or 10 years before. Probably 90% of Srila Prabhupada's disciples worldwide had just been initiated within the last 4 or 5 years. And everything was being done to please him. What was the motivating force for everyone? Srila Prabhupada is coming. The book distributors just wanted to hear about that smile on Prabhupada's face when the results of book distribution came. At the farms, devotees dedicated their lives, their everything to have wonderful, so that when Prabhupada came, he will be pleased with how happy the cows were. And every temple and every devotee, the only reality of Krishna consciousness we had is we can offer the results of our actions to Srila Prabhupada, and he will hear it, he will read it, he will see it, but now he's gone. Probably 99% of the assembled devotees today are far senior than the senior-most of Prabhupada's disciples at that time. How are we going to cooperate with each other? How are we going to continue? It was our spiritual lives experiencing a massive, devastating earthquake beyond our control. We couldn't bring them back. How did our movement carry on? Because the devotees, through hearing about Srila Prabhupada, through witnessing him, we learned what it means to serve our gurus in separation. In one Disappearance Day lecture that Srila Prabhupada gave in San Francisco in 1968, Srila Prabhupada describes his first meeting with Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, 1922. That's 103 years ago. And receiving that instruction to take Lord Chaitanya's message in the English language all over the world. That was at Ultadanga Junction Road in Calcutta, the very first Gaudiya Math. Srila Prabhupada describes he was a grihastha at the time, and he had to work to support his family. In 1935, he was living in Mumbai, and there was a parikrama led by his Guru Maharaj, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, here at Vrindavan. And it was here at Govardhan, at Sri Radha Kund, that he was walking with his Guru Maharaj. And Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur was revealing his heart in a very confidential way to our Srila Prabhupada. How he was in transcendental distress because devotees within the movement were fighting, were dividing over positions, over facilities. And it was here at Govardhan Radhakund exactly 90 years ago in Kartik that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada looked to our Srila Prabhupada and said, if you ever get money, print and distribute books. That instruction he received here at Govardhan went so deep into his heart. The next year, in December of 1936, Srila Prabhupada spoke that he was living in Bombay, doing his business, and he said around December 9th, I wrote a letter to my Guru Maharaj that so many of your disciples are sannyasis and they're brahmachari, and they're doing so much to carry on your movement. I'm doing business, I have a family, how could I best serve? Srila Prabhupada remembered he received a letter in return, dated December 13th, 1936, where Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he said, my dear Abhay Charanaravinda, just try to push on our movement in the English language. And this will do good for you and it will do good for everyone who helps you. I was just thinking this morning, in Lord Chaitanya's pastimes, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's Antya Leela, one day he was walking down the seashore and he saw a sand dune and he thought it was Govardhan Hill. And in the ecstasy of Radha Bhav, the ecstasy of Radha's supreme love, he went running to Govardhan Hill. And he was in such a state of ecstasy that he actually felt completely unconscious and entered into such a deep internal state of entering into the pastimes of Govardhan Hill. And it describes the ecstatic symptoms. His body was completely transformed. And the devotees gathered around him and were chanting louder and louder and louder to try to bring him back to life. And Lord Chaitanya came to consciousness, said, why have you brought me here? I was at Govardhan Hill and I was assisting the gopis in serving Radha and Krishna. Since that time, it is recognized that that hill in Puri is Govardhan Hill. And Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada built his bhajan kutir in Gaudiya Math on the top of that hill. And Srila Prabhupada told us that was where Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur wrote that last letter to Srila Prabhupada from Govardhan Hill. The instruction to distribute books was at Govardhan Hill at Radhakund. The final instruction to take Lord Chaitanya's teachings to the whole world in the English language was given from the Govardhan Hill of Jagannath Puri. And Srila Prabhupada said many times, because this was so meaningful to him, that the date that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada wrote that letter at the Chatak Parvat was exactly a fortnight before he left this world. On December 31st, 1936, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada disappeared from this physical world. Srila Prabhupada still had his family, still had his business, but he made the order of his Guru Maharaj's life and soul. He wasn't just despondent by his Guru's disappearance, although we could never, our conditioned minds and hearts can never fathom the devastation of separation he was feeling. But he gave his life to serving the mission. He applied this principle of Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's commentary from Bhagavad Gita, that one should make the order of one's Guru one's life and soul. And Srila Prabhupada, he said in this particular lecture that my Guru Maharaj, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada, he performed, in Prabhupada's words, severe penance to push on this movement worldwide. Srila Prabhupada so much appreciated the inconceivable sacrifice of compassion beyond all odds, beyond all historical possibilities. And Srila Prabhupada gave his life to carrying his Guru's desire to the whole world. Srila Prabhupada recognized my guru performed severe penances, and we have heard from so many devotees today the severe penances that Srila Prabhupada endured to give us Krishna consciousness. He is our founder Acharya. He's not only teaching how to live, but through his words and example, how to serve, even in separation. Incredible. He goes to a foreign land, so many foreign lands, and people who had never heard the word Krishna before Srila Prabhupada came. The goal of life for everybody practically was to enjoy, and everything the people wanted to do to be successful were against the four regulative principles. And Srila Prabhupada's telling them to follow. The depth of how they felt Srila Prabhupada cared about them, the depth of how they saw how much he was blissfully sacrificing to give Krishna consciousness to others, inspired inconceivable surrender. I've heard so many times from people in India, from very spiritually connected people, that when Srila Prabhupada brought his Western disciples to India and saw what they were doing, it was practically unheard of, even in India, to see such surrender from people with no cultural background. Why? They were just around Prabhupada for a couple years. We are in the divine presence of Malati Devi Prabhu. Started temple with others in San Francisco, in London, came to India, and Srila Prabhupada in Mayapur Dham told his sannyasi godbrothers, this girl, she is willing to cut her throat to serve and please me, and I am willing to do the same for her. Mandakini Devi Prabhu. Srila Prabhupada asked her to go to a militant country where our religion was a federal crime, and there was only one new devotee there out of hundreds of millions of people. Iron Curtain. Srila Prabhupada asked her to go alone to push on this movement. And she did it. And not only inspired by Srila Prabhupada's compassion of dedication and surrender, they gave their lives to assist her. They sacrificed everything. And now, well over 50 years later, Malati Devi and Mandakini Devi are still surrendering in the same way. Why? How? Because in the very depths of the core of their heart is their gratitude to Srila Prabhupada for giving his life completely for us. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur wrote on the Samadhi Mandir of Haridas Thakur in Jagannath Puri, he reasons ill who say that Vaishnavas die when thou art living still and sound. Vaishnavas died to live and live to spread the holy name around. Srila Prabhupada often explained in his writings, in his lectures, in his letters, there is the Vapu and the Vani. And actually within the core of one's heart, if one surrenders to the Vani, one actually gets that Vapu in the heart. Very deep, intimate, personal association. Jaya Nilo Premadana, this beautiful song of Narottam Das Thakur, he's beating his head against the stone, crying out in separation, in love, in gratitude. And most of the people he's naming in the song, he never met. They were from the previous generation. He was initiated in Vrindavan by Lokanath Goswami. He was a Shiksha disciple of Jiva Goswami. But before he came, before that transformation where he came to Vrindavan, Sanatana Goswami had already disappeared. Rupa Goswami had disappeared. Swarup Damodar Goswami disappeared. Raghunath Bhatta Goswami. These are the people that he's crying out in separation for. They were previous acharyas. It's important for all of us that Narottam Das Thakur appreciated so deeply their compassion, their mercy, their love, their teachings, and similarly, for all of us, Srila Prabhupada's disciples, next generation, we can be feeling that same separation in accordance to how we surrender, to how we really appreciate. Srila Prabhupada would often say, there has never been a moment when I did not feel the presence of my Guru Maharaj, and how he lived that, and how he inspired that. Yes, 48 years ago today, here in Vrindavan, when those devotees from all over the world were weeping and crying and chanting as Srila Prabhupada was leaving the world, how Srila Prabhupada invested within all of our hearts, all over the world, the opportunity to live within his heart and invite him to live within our hearts. It was so beautiful what was said before. Srila Prabhupada said, even though you may leave me, I will never leave you. That is how Srila Prabhupada was so grateful to anyone who helped him in the largest or smallest ways to push on the movement of his Guru Maharaj. And that holds true for each and every one of us. And when we understand Srila Prabhupada is feeling this way, and I have seen how devotees could fall so deep, but somehow or other, Srila Prabhupada would drag them back, even years after his disappearance. For each of us, Srila Prabhupada, you've chanted the holy names of Krishna. You've desired to serve those who he loves, the devotees. Srila Prabhupada will never give up on any of us. And he is our founder Acharya for all of us. So that means we, on behalf of Srila Prabhupada, should never give up on each other. This day of Srila Prabhupada's disappearance is the most wonderful celebration of his life, his teachings, his mercy, his limitless love for Krishna. And it's also a day where we meditate in the mood of Srila Narottam Das Thakur, that the most merciful, compassionate, loving person that has ever entered into our lives, the day that he left the world and entrusted us with that compassion, with that love, and with that great purpose. Perhaps more than any other day of the year is it a day when we could really reflect to the core of our hearts. What is our priorities? What is really important? What is significant in my life? Otherwise, we become endlessly distracted by the superficial temptations and fears of Maya. So happy devotees from Gita Nagari in Africa are here. His Holiness Bhakti Tirtha Swami Maharaj, he also went behind Iron Curtain, and he was the most detectable person practically in any country he went to, because he was a different color physically, and yet he was literally risking his life day after day to distribute Srila Prabhupada's books in the universities and the colleges and the libraries and the state houses, wherever. And when Srila Prabhupada received his reports, even when he was laying on his bed at the end of his pastimes in Vrindavan, he was so pleased, so happy, so grateful. At that time, he was only a devotee about 6 years, much less than most of us. He surrendered his life, he risked his life, and he was totally blissful and grateful to do it. Why? Because of the example of Srila Prabhupada, of how he carried on this great mission of his Guru Maharaj and Lord Sri Chaitanya Maharaj. Srila Prabhupada received his very last physical instruction from his Guru Maharaj from Govardhan. And the year before, that instruction about distributing books here at Govardhan. And now we are so fortunate to be assembled at Govardhan on this supremely auspicious day of Srila Prabhupada's disappearance here at Govardhan. Let us follow in his footsteps by taking his instruction as our life and our soul. Thank you very much.